What does it say when 2,000 war heroes just walk away? Not quietly, not discreetly, but in sync, in numbers so large, you can't dismiss it as coincidence. And not from any event, from the one thing meant to honor their sacrifice. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The Invictus Games. Prince Harry's passion project. His legacy. Born from war. Forged in pain. Designed to heal. Now unraveling. Why? What could make the very people these games were created for? Wounded veterans, survivors of combat, warriors who've stared death in the eye. Step back, all at once. What were they running from? And what does that mean for Prince Harry? For Meghan Markle? And for what the Invictus Games have become? Because they are afraid. Make no mistake. You don't call on lawyers and media advisors unless something's coming. Something big. Something they thought they had under control. But here's the part no one said out loud. This didn't happen overnight. No, it started small. A whisper in the dark. One man stepped back. Quietly. Then 10. Then 100. And by the time it reached 2,000, the story had already slipped through their fingers. Now it's too late to bury it. And maybe that's the real story here. Because behind the headlines and hashtags, behind the glossy promo reels and choreographed smiles, there's something rotting beneath the surface. Something no one at Archwell or Netflix or even Kensington Palace wants to admit. This isn't just a protest. It's a reckoning. One with names, dates, footage, and consequences. But let's back up for a second. Let's ask something honest. Something uncomfortable. Who really owns Invictus? Is it Harry? The veterans? The donors? The crown? And what happens when ownership becomes performance and service becomes branding? You see, that's the contradiction. The one no one wants to touch. Because on paper, the Invictus Games should be untouchable. A global celebration of resilience, where injured veterans rise, reclaim their strength, and compete, not as victims, but as warriors. And that's beautiful. That's why it worked. But beauty can be corrupted, even by good intentions, especially when those intentions get complicated. And lately, Prince Harry's intentions have gotten very complicated. Once a soldier, now a celebrity. Once a prince of duty, now a duke of brand. The moment Meghan Markle entered the equation, things shifted. Not because she was American, not because she was divorced, and not because she was a woman of color, though the media made sure to weaponize every one of those facts. No, they shifted because she understood something Harry never did. Every institution, especially one as sacred as Invictus, can be turned into leverage, especially when you're losing control of the narrative elsewhere. And right now, Harry and Meghan are losing control of everything. The Netflix deal that once guaranteed them creative power, on life support. The Spotify deal, terminated. Abruptly, unceremoniously. The book deals, controversial. The royal relationships, fractured beyond repair. So what's left? Invictus. The one thing Harry still had that gave him purpose beyond the tabloids. The one space where he wasn't the spare, but the founder, the leader, the veteran among veterans. But now, that space is cracking. From within. Because when 2,000 service members say, "We don't trust you anymore," they're not just walking away from a game. They're walking away from him. And quietly, somewhere in Montecito, he knows it. So how did we get here? That's what this expose is about. Over the next hour, we're going to walk through the story the Sussexes hoped would stay buried. Emails that were meant to stay sealed. Conversations recorded in boardrooms. A suicide letter that rattled the entire Invictus leadership. And yes, video footage the BBC allegedly refused to air. We'll speak with insiders, analyze sponsorship deals, break down financial irregularities that, until now, have gone unchallenged. But more than that, we'll examine the human cost. Because this isn't just a scandal. It's a collapse. And somewhere in that collapse is a man who tried to do good and may have lost himself in the process. And a woman who claimed to champion his cause, but may have turned it into a stage. Now, before we go further, you might be wondering, why now? Why is this story surfacing right now and not 3 months ago? Not during last year's games? It's not just timing. It's strategy. Because 2026 was supposed to be the rebranding year. A fresh relaunch. New sponsors, a broader social media push, celebrity collaborations. Even talks of a docu-series to coincide with the games. But that plan collapsed in 1 week. All it took was one unexpected resignation. One soldier who said, "I'm done," then another, then 5 more. And suddenly, the dam broke. Turns out, there had been tension for a while. Emails going unanswered. Veterans being told to sign NDAs. Contractors complaining of last-minute changes, usually coming from Meghan's side. And that might have been manageable if it had stopped there. But it didn't. Because what no one counted on, what not even Harry saw coming, was that the veterans talk. Across time zones. Across ranks. Across languages. And once they began comparing notes, a pattern emerged. One that couldn't be ignored. One that pointed to something deeper. And here's where things turn. Because this isn't just about optics. It's about trust. When a soldier loses a limb, you rebuild. You adapt. You carry on. But when a soldier loses trust, there's no prosthetic for that. And right now, that's exactly what has been lost. But here's the thing. It didn't have to be this way. It could have been a quiet course correction. A few apologies, some internal shifts, maybe a change in leadership structure. But they didn't choose that. Instead, they tightened their grip. They tried to spin it, to shift blame, to obscure the numbers. But it didn't work. Because veterans don't play those games. They've seen spin before. They've heard empty promises. And they've buried too many brothers to care about headlines. So when 2,000 of them walk, they're not bluffing. They're sending a message. And maybe the most chilling part? We don't even know if it's over. Because as this story unfolds, there are still unanswered questions, still missing files, still withheld footage, still one PR firm refusing to comment, despite 3 formal requests. And now, with just months before the next scheduled Invictus Games, there's a growing call for something unthinkable. Shut it down. Cancel the games. Not postpone. Not restructure. Cancel. And for Harry, that's personal. Because if Invictus goes, what's left? A memoir? A reality show? A Montecito mansion with no legacy? He was supposed to be the prince who walked away from the crown, but kept his purpose. But what happens when even that falls apart? That's what we're going to find out. Because this story isn't over. In fact, it's only just beginning. And next, we'll take you to the moment it all started to unravel. To the first soldier who stepped back, and why his quiet exit became a roar. But what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. Why would a man who once called Prince Harry his last hope suddenly resign in silence? No explanation. No statement. Just a name, crossed off a list. It was quiet, almost invisible. Unless you were looking. And someone was. That's where the trouble began. We traced it back to a single moment. An event that didn't make headlines. No press. No cameras. Just a preliminary training session in late March for the upcoming 2026 Invictus Games in Vancouver. The veteran in question, let's call him Matthew, was no stranger to the games. He'd competed before, even medaled, and according to teammates, he was planning to return stronger than ever. Until he wasn't. He showed up late that day, wearing the usual tracksuit. But something was off. He didn't speak much, didn't joke like he used to. And when they gathered for the opening briefing, something happened. A clipboard was passed around, updated training schedules, consent forms, sponsor documentation. Matthew looked at it, paused, then stood up. He didn't argue, didn't explain. He just said quietly, "I'm out." Some tried to stop him, asked if he was okay. He said nothing, just nodded and walked out. And 3 days later, his name vanished from the official roster. That was it. At first, no one thought much of it. People leave. People burn out. But then someone checked something strange. The departure wasn't logged in the internal coordination sheet, the one shared with core Invictus staff. It had been manually removed from the public schedule with no timestamp. Almost like it had been scrubbed. Erased. That got the attention of a coordinator, a woman named Anya, who'd worked with Invictus for nearly 7 years. And Anya knew Matthew personally, knew his story, knew the battle scars he carried. So she sent him a message. Just 3 words. "What happened, Matt?" No reply. For days. Until one came. And all it said was, "Check your inbox tomorrow. Don't text me again." The next morning, Anya received a forwarded chain of emails. Some were internal. Others were between Matthew and what appeared to be a third-party PR agency. One not listed on any official Invictus communications. And in the center of the thread was a single question Matthew had asked repeatedly over the course of 2 weeks. Why are we being asked to sign new confidentiality clauses when we haven't even started competing yet? The replies? Deflective. Corporate. One line stood out. Your participation is part of a broader media strategy that may include docu-series elements. Details will be shared in due course. In the meantime, discretion is paramount. Docu-series elements? Matthew hadn't agreed to be filmed. Not like that. Not for something vague and undefined. And he wasn't alone in his concern. There were more names in the CC field. Other athletes. Other veterans. One of them had written back a few days later. I didn't sign up to be content. I signed up to compete. That sentence, simple as it was, set the tone for everything that followed. Because what happened with Matthew wasn't an isolated exit. It was a fuse, and it had just been lit. Behind the scenes, veterans were already comparing notes. And what they found shook them. Because the more they looked, the more they realized. They were no longer being treated like participants. They were being handled. Carefully. Strategically. Every communication ran through new channels. Not military liaisons. Not past Invictus Games advisors. But PR teams. Producers. Corporate reps from Archwell's side. And Meghan's name? It showed up more and more. Not as a figurehead, but as a decision maker. Now let's stop and consider that. At what point does involvement become interference? At what point does stewardship become control? That's the line veterans started whispering about. At first, those whispers stayed inside WhatsApp threads and encrypted Discord chats. But then, one of them leaked. It was just a screenshot. A single screen. But it spread like fire. Someone had asked, anyone else uncomfortable with how this feels like a Netflix shoot more than a competition? Another replied, feels like we're props, not people. That image, sent to a journalist anonymously, made its way into a newsroom in London. The story wasn't greenlit. Not then. Too speculative. No hard proof. But someone else saw it. A retired brigadier general, quietly serving as an honorary patron. And he didn't like what he saw. That's when the emails began. Questions about vetting. Requests for clarification on sponsorships. Concerns raised, formally, to the Sussex team. And that's where things took a turn. Because instead of answers, the veterans got silence. Instead of transparency, they were met with redirection. Meetings were postponed. Contracts were suddenly under revision. Spokespersons were out of office. And behind closed doors, one phrase kept surfacing. Brand alignment. That's what it had come down to. Not honor. Not healing. Not dignity. Brand. Alignment. And for many of these soldiers, men and women who had lost limbs, brothers, years of their lives to war, that was the final insult. That's when the mass withdrawals began. Not all at once. Not with press releases or social media blasts. But in silence. Emails. Quiet resignations. A decision made behind the eyes, between the soul and the scar. It started with 10, then another 20, then 100. And each time, the organizers thought they could manage it. Fill the slots. Spin the story. Until they couldn't. Until it became too big to hide. And now they're afraid. Because this isn't just reputational. This is foundational. The entire Invictus model, its soul, is under question. Because how do you run a wounded warrior competition? With no warriors willing to show up? And maybe more haunting. What did Prince Harry know, and when? Because here's the twist. According to one internal source, someone who's worked closely with Harry since the early days. He did know. Not everything. Not at first. But by the time the withdrawals hit 300, he was briefed. And yet, the strategy from his camp wasn't to change course. It was to double down. Focus on optics. Secure the sponsors. Control the press narrative. Protect the brand. And that's what changed the veterans' frustration into something colder. Something permanent. Because when soldiers feel unheard, they don't shout. They disappear. And that's exactly what they did. Until suddenly, 2,000 were gone. Not as a protest.